The signs of a violent departure are obvious, but the truth of what caused it remains hidden in the dark. Looking at the first half of Eugene Cantrall's poem, How He Went Out, we are presented with a specific aftermath. There are skids on the floor to the door in the hall, and the stainless pinch resisting the fight, the shattered casement on the upper floor, and a crimsoned toolbox standing upright. Then the text shifts to the source of the struggle. Something was there and watched out of sight, and switched off the on-light so it's not anymore. Left a wafting of foul so things took to flight. A legion of questions still hides from the light. We can only hope now that he is in flight, and answers arrive in dreams in the night. This pervasive tension is a structural byproduct, the result of a collision between rigid historical form and the chaos of modern vulnerability. To understand the mechanics of this dread, we have to look at Cantrall's use of classical architecture, both physical buildings and poetic forms, as sentient, malevolent traps. This approach roots itself in 18th century Gothic traditions. At Strawberry Hill House, created by Horace Walpole, we see the origins of environments mirroring human psychology. He also integrates romantic philosophy. Following John Keats's concept of unheard melodies, Cantrall treats the human mind as the active creator of reality and beauty. Finally, he layers in the raw vulnerability of the 20th century confessional poets. Echoing writers like Sylvia Plath, Cantrall focuses heavily on internal psychological trauma. We will explore how Cantrall uses these traditions to create specific structural subversions in this text. Navigating his poetics requires investigating the friction between the Victorian ghost story and the modern psychological confession buried within these 14 lines. Look at this structural blueprint. A traditional Petrarchan sonnet is strictly governed by a 14-line constraint and a standard ABBA rhyme scheme. Historically, this format relies on the volta, or the turn. Right here at the 9th line, the poem requires a shift in thought, a release of the tension built up in the first 8 lines. Now, compare that classical model directly with the structure of How He Went Out. Cantrall deliberately removes the volta. At line 9, there is no shift, and there is no release. The poem forcibly drives forward, trapping the reader in the escalating panic of the disappearance. He compounds this stress by altering the final rhyme scheme and ending the poem on an unresolved wish. He denies us any narrative closure. By subverting this rigid 14-line architecture, Cantrall turns the classical sonnet form into a claustrophobic casket. The poem's structure mimics the inescapable nature of the subject's vanishing. If the structure traps us, the diction accounts for what happened inside. We must examine the physical traces left in the aftermath of the struggle. The language shifts here into a forensic mode. Skids on the floor, a stainless pinch resisting the fight, and the crimsoned toolbox suggest a struggle that was both frantic and physically damaging. Cantrall uses this specific, archaic-tinged language to create a tactile sense of dread. It directly echoes the early Gothic tradition of sublime terror championed by writers like M.G. Lewis. This terror takes the shape of an unseen presence referred to only as something. It acts with predatory agency, deliberately switching off the light to plunge the room into vulnerability, and watching the struggle from out of sight. This entity's control over the physical room aligns with Cantrall's broader use of sentient environments. In his other pieces, hospital infrastructure becomes a predatory organism, and Iron Castle gates literally breathe and wheeze. Cantrall treats Gothic architecture as an active, predatory participant, transforming a domestic setting into a trap for its subjects. But limiting our analysis to the physical room ignores Cantrall's calculated ambiguity. To read him accurately, we have to hold multiple valid interpretations at once. Under the Gothic lens, the unseen something is a literal external supernatural predator abducting the subject in the dark. However, we must also apply the confessional reading. Here, the unseen something represents a sudden, violent internal psychological break. Look back at the shattered casement and the crimsoned toolbox. These images can also be read as metaphors for self-inflicted trauma rather than an external struggle. This framing relies on the mid-20th century confessional poetic tradition, recalling the deeply personal, interior suffering documented by writers like Anne Sexton. This psychological framework reveals the room as a physical manifestation of an iceberg, the frozen, self-protective isolation of a mind in crisis. This brings us to the poem's final lines. A legion of questions remains hidden from the waking world, leaving the narrator to hope that answers arrive in dreams in the night. Rational, physical inspection completely fails to provide closure. Because the malevolent force operated in darkness, physical evidence cannot explain what happened. The reliance on dreams connects to Cantrall's broader theme of searching for truth. In his other works, he uses divination tools, like scrying mirrors or dowsing pendulums, to bypass the conscious mind and access buried psychological realities. The poem's lack of narrative closure is a deliberate architectural feature, engineered to leave the suspense forever unbroken. Cantrall merges the external dread of 18th century Gothic architecture with the internal trauma of the modern confessional voice. He constructs a poetic space that traps the reader inside their own existential anxieties, leaving us in the dark with nothing but questions.